Tonight, we are pleased to be joined by local historian, photographer, and documentarian Tom Modugno, who will be presenting the history of the Goleta Slough as part of our Maritime Distinguished Speaker Series. Tom is a lifelong resident of Goleta, both a small business owner and community activist. As a local history enthusiast, he began to realize that most local residents were unaware of the region's rich history. To fill this gap in historical awareness, Tom initiated, designed, and implemented the popular website goletahistory.com in 2014. Since then, he has researched, authored, and published numerous articles on the site, which provide the public with a range of important and engaging information on key historical sites, people, and events in the Goleta region. His work has preserved historical stories on important sites, such as the Barnsdall gas station and the two original hangars at the Santa Barbara airport, while also encouraging residents and visitors alike to explore and learn more about Goleta's remaining landmarks, buildings, and history. Our curiosity might lead us to ask, what is the oldest building in Goleta? Where was the first telephone exchange located? What is the Elwood Queen? Who planted the refugio palms? Or maybe, which two Chumash villages were Dos Pueblos? What did the witness tree witness? Tom has answered all these questions and more on his website. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Goleta historian Tom Modugno.
Thank you. What an honor to be here. I was very confused when they contacted me and said they wanted me to be part of a distinguished speaker series, because that's never been words that I've been coupled with. And then when they sent that picture of me, it obviously looks like I just did something illegal at the Goleta Slough, but they did that Photoshop. That wasn't me. But thank you, and I'm glad to see there's so many fans here of the Goleta Slough. Although I know you're probably fans of the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum, which is a pretty amazing place, and it's worth checking out. So before I start on the presentation, I just want to give one little short story about my personal interaction with the Goleta Slough. Probably the most personal I ever got with the Goleta Slough was in the mid-1970s, after a good winter storm. Some friends and I thought it would be fun to raft down the San Jose Creek, which ends up in the Goleta Slough. So we got a couple of inflatable, I can't see anything, by the way. This is amazing. It's like I'm in a room by myself. We got a couple of inflatable two-man rafts and went as far up the San Jose as we could, which would be the Bozio property up past the end of the top of Patterson. And we piled into the rafts and floated down the San Jose Creek all the way into the Goleta Slough, which down there about where Sizzler was, it got real wide and concrete, and so we kind of had to get out and walk a little bit right there. But it was still a great adventure, and we ended up in the Goleta Slough, and that was my first real contact with the Goleta Slough, other than just seeing it as we drive by. But it's been a part of my life, my whole life, and it's what makes Goleta special, I think, because it's pretty unusual land formation that all these creeks run into one big lake, essentially, that has been, well, let's learn about it. So we'll start with slide number 1. The Goleta Slough, as we know it today, is narrow, semi-stagnant waterway that winds through the large marsh beside the airport. Not much to look at, really, but believe it or not, it was once a large body of water that was used as a port of call for sailing ships. This view from the edge of UCSB makes it a little easier to imagine if all that vegetation was water, it was a large bay. Looking to the east, you can see what's left of Mescaltitlan Island. This once prominent landmass sat in the bay and was home to a huge native population, and then later the island was slowly shaved down to almost nothing. Long before any Europeans showed up, the Chumash people enjoyed the large protected body of water. Pure mountain water fed the slough from 9 different streams, abundant with steelhead trout and waterfowl. Numerous villages lined the shore of the bay. The tree-covered Mescaltitlan Island sat in the bay, and it was a very popular spot for housing. Food sources, transportation, and entertainment, all right at their front door, complemented by a warm, pleasant climate. It's no wonder villages sprang up all around the bay and on the island. Even prehistoric civilizations knew the secret of good real estate: location, location, location. This map, developed by Jay Johnson of UCSB, shows some of the Chumash names for familiar places around the bay. The village on Mescaltitlan was called Hilo, and if there's any Chumash, I apologize for my mispronunciations here tonight. Campus Point was Sismicu, and the slough was called Sitiptip, meaning place of much salt. In 1929, David Banks Rogers made this illustration of the vast size of the slough in prehistoric times. The slough was the most densely populated area in the Chumash region, and most likely all of California. This hybrid map shows what areas the prehistoric slough would have covered today in modern Goleta. You can see the size of it. Hollister Avenue was underwater, and the water even reached to the location of today's Highway 101. The first Europeans to set eyes on this amazing place belonged to the crew of the Cabrillo expedition on October 16th, 1542. Cabrillo commented on the large population found here, but he did not come ashore until he got up to Dos Pueblos. Shortly after Cabrillo passed by Goleta, he died from injuries he obtained on San Miguel Island. According to Walker Tompkins, the Chumash legend says that 2 large ships anchored in the slough, and their crews buried their leader on Mescaltitlan Island. Historians continue to debate the final resting place of Cabrillo to this day. After Cabrillo, several other explorers passed by, but none offered much description of the slough until the Portola expedition came overland in 1769. Portola's goal was to locate good places to build presidios and missions. The missionary priest Juan Crespi gave the Goleta area the name Santa Margarita de Cortona. Pedro Fages kept a diary, and he gave the slough and the villages around it the name Pueblos de la Isla, or island villages. But the soldiers nicknamed the island Mescaltitlan after a very similar island in Mexico. And as was usually the case, the nickname the soldiers came up with was the one that stuck. The Portola expedition described the thick oak forests around the slough, plenty of fresh water, the abundance of villages, and the remarkable amount of natives in this area. For these reasons, they deemed it a good place to build a mission. One of the journalists on the expedition, Juan Crespi, wrote, "Seems as though all the lushness in the world lies there, a very grand spot for a very large mission." Juan Crespi also wrote, "This is all a good land." And that phrase was resurrected by Walker Tompkins in his seminal 1966 book, and it is still a popular nickname for Goleta to this day, and I would say 80% of all new businesses in Goleta are called the Good Land something or other. So Juan had a real way with a good nickname there. In 1782, 2 Spanish ships were sent to finalize the location for a mission in the area. Lieutenant Jose Ortega and Governor Felipe de Neve led a land expedition simultaneously, carrying equipment, soldiers, and livestock. One of the ship captains, named Pantoja, described a large bay surrounded by the thickest forest he had seen on this coast, and a large amount of natives and canoes. While they did want to build a mission in a heavily populated area, The sheer number of natives here was a little bit intimidating. Too much of a good thing right there. A former military man, Governor Neve, wanted to put the Santa Barbara Presidio on Mescaltitlan Island with its natural saltwater moat protecting it from attackers. Goleta offered plenty of flat open land for growing crops, a safe port for the supply ships from Mexico, and a perfect spot for the mission at the west end of the Moore Mesa. And those arrows would show the island where they would like to put the Presidio, and the west end of the mesa there where they wanted to put he wanted to put the mission, but that didn't happen, did it? Pantoja's 1782 report provided this detailed illustration of the slough, and he refers to the slough as Lake Mescaltitlan. Curiously, it appears to show two islands. The A's represent villages, and he overestimated the population to be 8,000 or 9,000. Pantoja reports the slough was muddy, but on high tide, the depth south of the island was 12 feet. The rest of the slough was only 4 feet deep, and the bottom was fine sand. Also notice the slough extends far to the left where it connected to the Devereux Lagoon. So in wet years, the UCSB Isla Vista area would have been an island. Just like today, the depth and the size of the mouth were dependent on the tide, the time of year, swell directions, rainfall, etc. This report was made in August, so if Pantoja had come in the winter, the mouth would probably have been much larger. The purpose of Pantoja's survey was to determine if the slough could be used as a harbor, and he decided it was not suitable for that purpose. Additionally, the creeks in August were mostly dry, and Goleta didn't have a lot of rock readily available for construction purposes. So for those reasons, they instead chose a spot near Mission Creek, 2 leagues down the coast. 10 years later, in 1792, the British explorer George Vancouver passed through the Santa Barbara Channel, and he made a stop off in Goleta. He describes the abundant tar on the surface of the water. So tar is nothing new, people. The very large village pleasantly situated within a small bay, and the remarkable intelligence of the natives at this particular location. Vancouver, further proof that Goleta people have always been the smartest, right? I'll just throw that in there. Vancouver wrote that the slough might have afforded good anchorage, if not for the bed of seaweed across its entrance, indicating a shallow rock bottom. Walker Tompkins wrote that in the early 1800s, Jose de la Guerra used the slough as an anchorage for his schooner. In 1819, his ship ran aground trying to slip into the narrow slough mouth. De la Guerra hired Benjamin Foxen to repair the ship, and Foxen did the work in the mud flats just inside the slough. This map, made by reputable cartographer Jose Narvaez in 1823, shows the slough as a bay, and he calls it Mescaltitlan Island. So the soldier's name really has stuck by now. There was no turning back at this point. In 1829, Benjamin Foxman built a brand new ship inside the slough on the Atascadero Inlet of the slough for William Dana. Foxen imported the lumber and had it floated into the slough. The ship was constructed in a cradle and launched into the slough by flooding the area around it so it floated free. Other ships were built in the slough later, but a lack of local lumber kept it from becoming a popular shipbuilding location. This map comes from the 1853 Desenyo filed by Daniel Hill in order to get his land grant. Note the tree symbols on the island and what appear to be differing depths throughout the slough. It shows a huge sandbar at the entrance to the slough, and at the eastern end can be seen where he wrote wreck there, a somewhat common occurrence, it seemed. Near the spot was where 5 cannons were found by Nolan Harder as he walked the low tide in January 1981. A group of volunteers acted fast and were able to remove the cannons before the sand washed back in. And upstairs are 2 of these cannons right now. I was just looking at them. They were dated to be from the early 1800s, but since there were so many shipwrecks in the area, we still don't know exactly which ship they came from. Local historian Justin Rouge noted all the shipwrecks that occurred near the Goleta Slough in the 1800s. Whether these ships were trying to gain entry into the bay or if they were simply caught in storms and washed ashore is purely speculation. Either way, it seems the slough was a popular place for large ships to be. This map is from the Den Decenio of 1855, and it shows the sandbar long and wide. The western side of the slough looks to be more of a waterway, and the eastern side seems to be a marsh. Note the name Point Salinas, which today is just surf-battered rocks off Campus Point. Also noticed on the east side the word Foxen, perhaps referencing the location of Foxen's repair of De La Guerra's schooner, or maybe where he constructed that new ship. I think they both happened in that area. Quite the opposite extreme, this map from 1860 shows no sandbar at all, and the bay looks wide open and robust, the island firmly in place. Whether this was just drawn in haste or that's how it actually was at the time, we can't really know for sure. But we do know that the sandspit size fluctuated throughout the years, just like Goleta Beach still does. In late 1861, the heavy rains started falling and didn't stop, dumping inch after inch on the overgrazed foothills surrounding Goleta. Cattle were a big deal in Goleta in the 1860s. The rain continued for months in what would be known as the Great Flood of 1862, wreaking havoc throughout California. The overabundant rain caused rapid erosion, and muddy water poured down through the creeks, dumping 14 feet of silt into the slough. Along with the sediment came uprooted trees and chaparral, colliding with the incoming ocean tide and settling into the slough. After the first week of steady rain, the slough became a huge, shallow bay from Hope Ranch to Devereux. The great lagoon that had been a safe haven for ships for centuries was turned into a shallow mud bog in a very short period. It was never to be the same again. This map from 1870 shows the post-flood slough looking more like a narrow waterway than a bay, and the sandbar is very pronounced. Mescaltitlan Island and much of the slough, Mescaltitlan Bay Island and much of the slough was now owned by Alexander Moore, and he used the island to grow beans. By this time, most, if not all, of the oak forest that was on the island had been chopped down for firewood, leaving it barren. Just to show again how the weather affected the slough, this map dated January 1871 shows no sign of a sandbar at all, probably the work of a harsh winter storm. The slough area looks large, but it's labeled as an estero, which means swamp or marsh. In 1891, Aventino Cavaletto and his co-workers were rowboating in the slough after work, and they became stuck in the mud at low tide. As the men struggled to push their boat out of the muck, one of them stubbed his toe on a large metal ring. They started digging it out and made an incredible discovery. Pictured here is James Cavaletto pointing to the area of the incident below the Campbell Hall parking lot at UCSB. They uncovered a huge wrought iron anchor, 8 feet tall and dating back to the 16th century. Cavaletto loaded it onto his wagon, and it served as a hitching post at the Cavaletto residence for 60 years. Walker Tompkins is shown with the historic anchor, and that still can be seen at the Stowe House in Goleta today. Exactly when and what ship the anchor came from remains a Goleta mystery. And why would they leave their anchor behind? Or did the ship sink in the slough? Theories abound. This 1888 map shows the marshlands of the slough still having a large footprint, but not deep enough to ever be a harbor again. Around this time, the Moore family allowed some other Goleta families to camp and boat around in the slough for fun. For 15 years, the Sexton family spent about a month of every summer camping at Camp Lupine, usually on the east side of the slough across from the Sandspit. This was taken around the 4th of July. Note Mescaltitlan Island on the upper right of this photo and the UCSB bluffs on the far left. long before UCSB was even thought of. They would load their wagons up with tents, cots, bedding, food, supplies, stoves, whatever else they needed for a long camp out at the slough, including flat-bottom boats for paddling around in the shallow waters. The sextons had a wonderful time every summer, boating, exploring, spearing sharks, digging clams, picking mussels, and searching Mescaltila Island for Indian curios. Judging by all the smiles, it looks like they're having a good time. And is that a shark jaw skeleton that guy is holding up? Looks like it. The Smith family also camped on the slough in some summers, and they built a few semi-permanent structures on the sand spit for their visits, so that would be on today's Goleta Beach. Their own private playground to be enjoyed every summer. Can you imagine? And they brought their little camera with them, too. Look at that thing. A little different than your iPhone, I guess. The U.S. Geological Survey map from 1902 shows the sandbar all the way across the entrance and a road onto the island, probably built by Moore to tend his crops. Walker Tompkins wrote about the abundance of cube-shaped boulders with iron rings attached, found around the Tascadero Creek Inlet, on the east side of the slough. They were made from a stone not found in this area, so Tompkins concluded they were discarded ballast from foreign ships taking refuge in the slough. The Moore family used some of the blocks as foundations for their chicken coops, and Horace Sexton remembered seeing piles of the ballast stones being bulldozed into the creek in later years. Solid evidence of large ships using the Goleta Harbor, and they are still buried in the mud to this day. This 1900 map shows the slough as a series of small waterways. Number 1 denotes the location of the 16th century Cavaletto anchor. Number 2 is the Atascadero Inlet, where ships were built and the ballast stones were found. And number 3 is the usual location of the Sexton's Camp Lupine. Also notice the spelling of Mescaleton Island. Many locals actually thought the name of the islands was Skeleton Island, Mescaleton Island, a slurring of the Spanish name, but also indicative of the years of grave looting that had occurred there. In the summer of 1923, the Humane Society reported that people were again shooting seals and sea lions in the slough. Evidently, this had been a problem in the past, and the Humane Society began regular patrols to stop that. But in November of the same year, 1923, college students were heading out there to study the wildlife, so there was an appreciation for the slough even that early on. This 1927 photo was taken from across the slough, looking at the sandspit, and that's the UCSB Mesa beyond there. The tower was a gas well that was abandoned by this time and removed soon after. The structures in the foreground were semi-permanent housing for the campers. Today, this is Goleta Beach Park. In the 1920s, barnstormers were flying throughout the country, selling airplane rides, performing stunts, and convincing folks that airplanes were here to stay. Several passed through Santa Barbara, and that may have prompted this forward-thinking map maker to make the proclamation in 1927 that the worthless old Goleta Slough would be a great place for an airport. Fill it in and make it useful, just like they did up in Oakland. He was way ahead of his time. In 1928, these daring young flyers landed an airplane in a cow pasture behind St. Raphael's Church, which at that time was on the corner of Hollister and Fairview Avenue, which we now know as Jiffy Lube. Not quite as romantic, but they landed behind Jiffy Lube, and they leased that land and set up a flight school right there. The aviators enlisted the help of some county employees to scrape away the willows and the brush, creating a primitive airstrip that marked the beginning of what was to become the Santa Barbara Municipal Airport and the next nail in the coffin for the slough as a waterway. couple years later, the map maker's vision became a reality. The original 2 hangars, by that little tiny white arrow, if you can see that, the 2 hangars were built alongside Hollister Avenue, and the tiny ag town of Goleta suddenly had an airport. From this day forward, the slough began to be thought of a nuisance that needed to be filled in. This 1928 aerial photo shows an almost closed slough mouth choked with sand. The second arrow shows an intact Mescaltitlan Island with some vegetation still on it, and the waterways through the slough are clearly visible. The X denotes where I stood when I took the photos that started this story, the edge of the UCSB Mesa. Note the lack of sand all the way up towards Campus Point, evidence of fluctuating beach sizes that still occur to this day. Look at all that open space. About the same time as that previous photo, this was taken from the west end of the sand spit looking east with Mescaltitlan Island on the left. 1928 from above, and what must have been winter, judging by the sand spit being very small and a lot of wave activity at the slough mouth, excuse me. Notice the water right up to the bluffs again on the lower left with little or no sandy beach. Archaeologists realized what a treasure trove the slough area was by the late 1920s and the early 1930s. Many relics were recovered, and a lot was learned about the native societies that lived there. This shot of Mescaltitlan Island, of a Mescaltitlan Island dig, is looking east towards the Moore Mesa and where those ballast blocks were found. This official 1935 surveyor's map gives a clear view of where the waterways were at that time. A massive sandbar is shown, and a small but clearly open slough mouth existed. Note the highlighted text, title under litigation, in yellow there. In the 1930s, the ownership of the slough was in litigation between the original Nicholas Dinn estate and the T.B. Bishop Company due to a clerical error. The Dinn estate was later declared the rightful owner. This 1938 aerial shows the last days of an intact Mescaltitlan Island and at the green arrow. The white arrow shows the primitive airport runways, and the red arrow is downtown Goleta. The slough and the UCSB Mesa are also labeled. Around 1940, the federal government established a program to construct airports all across the country. Since Goleta already had a little airfield with a lot of empty land around it, it seemed unnatural for expansion. So in 1941, construction began on the new Santa Barbara Municipal Airport and the Goleta Slough. At the Goleta Slough, sorry. A portion of Mescaltitlan Island was used as fill dirt to turn the marshlands into runways with no regard for the archaeological impacts. This aerial shows the filling in of the slough as it was happening. The white arrow shows the original 2 hangars alongside Hollister Avenue. The red arrow is Mescaltitlan Island, sliced almost perfectly in half. The yellow arrow shows the heavy equipment staging area and some fill dirt being pulled in from today's UCSB Mesa. You can already see the airport taking shape in the slough. By the end of that year, we had entered the Second World War, and the government took over the Goleta Airport for a Marine base. They immediately kicked the construction into high gear, taking more of the island for fill dirt. This shot captures the destruction of the island with Marine aircraft visible in the upper right. Almost overnight, the sleepy little airfield at Goleta became a bustling military base. The arrow shows what's left of Mescaltitlan Island. And you can see where UCSB is now. That was the barracks for the Marine base at that time. In 1944, the slough was barely visible. What was left was squished over to the west, traversed by a small road connecting the airbase to the barracks area. But once a slough, always a slough. is what we should have titled this presentation, I think. Every heavy rain, the airfield transformed into its former self. The Marines nicknamed the base the Swamp, and pilots jokingly requested permission to land in Lake Santa Barbara. The slough was a mere shadow of its former self in the 1950s, but man wasn't done messing with it yet. 1951, the Goleta Sanitary District stopped using the former Marine sewage treatment plant at Campus Point, and they constructed a new plant alongside the remainder of Mescaltitlan Island to better serve the growing community. And that's still there today, but it's a lot bigger than that now. In the mid-1950s, Goleta had a brand new water source at Lake Achuma, and houses were replacing ag land rapidly. The sky was the limit, and business was booming. The traffic in Goleta was getting very congested in the mid-1950s. Can you imagine? However, thanks to the burgeoning new research park and the university that took over part of the Marine base, that's what brought all the traffic. To remedy this, a new dedicated entrance to UCSB was proposed, but where to put it was the subject of a heated debate that went on for years. These were some of the ideas for what would later become Ward Memorial. These were places they wanted to put Ward Memorial, and they couldn't make up their mind for a long time. About the same time, enthusiastic Goleta businessmen came up with a great idea. They could make money off what was left of that dirty old slough by making it a marina. This launched what would also become a long debate of an idea that, much like the slough, just wouldn't die. Several different developers tried to push several different plans through the planning process over the next decade and a half, starting with this grand design that used both sides of the slough. Then moving to just the east side of the slough. All the while, the city of Santa Barbara was fighting against it, fearing that another harbor in such close proximity to theirs would take away the government funds they needed to constantly dredge the sand out of their harbor. Yeah. After years of intense debate, the new entrance highway was built directly to the east side of the UCSB campus to help alleviate the traffic problem. Once again, Mescaltitlan Island was used to fill in more of the slough, finishing the Ward Memorial Boulevard by 1963. Controversy found the slough again in the 1960s when UCSB proposed extending Ward Memorial to reconnect with Highway 101 near Stork Road, giving direct access to the campus from the west. This would require more filling in of the slough, which contradicted the county's general plan that still had the remainder of the slough becoming a marina. The debate over whether to build the marina or the Western Ward Memorial extension raged on for years. Developers tried to compromise with this airport lake, complete with a boat launch and a parking area for more than 800 cars, all hanging on the approval of the new Western Freeway, of course. And I apologize for that image, but I could not find a better version of that. The Harbor Commission was concerned that the stone jetties proposed for the new Goleta Harbor entrance would sand-starve Santa Barbara beaches, so they came out against that idea. Goleta's population was exploding in the 1960s, and the developers were in a frenzy. This overzealous plan shows both a harbor, a recreational lake by the airport, as well as a new Western Ward Memorial extension going past a new golf course. Even the existing Goleta and Isla Vista were labeled as redeveloped. Build, build, build. They were ready to do it. This editorial from the Lompoc Record in 1967 illustrates the majority of society's mindset at the time. It says, this marshy and mosquito-ridden natural environment was nothing more than a means. Well, they were calling it a marshy and a mosquito-ridden natural environment, but it was nothing more than a means to make money, and no one was really disagreeing with them at that time. That attitude would soon change, however. But meanwhile, in 1969, two separate projects were proposed for the same eastern slough area. What finally killed the Goleta Marina idea were the realities of flooding on heavy rain years, the resulting silt and the sand constantly drifting at the harbor mouth. Eventually, just a trimmed-down version of Fess Parker's ambitious mobile home project was approved. Here it is today, known as Rancho Goleta Lakeside, nestled up alongside Ward Memorial Boulevard. A major man-made disaster would finally shut down the Western Ward Memorial extension idea and slam the brakes on the rampant development. Early in 1969, thousands of barrels of crude oil were spilled into the channel, turning Santa Barbara's beautiful beaches black and miserable. Thousands of seabirds and other marine animals were killed, and the media coverage was intense. People around the world watched the catastrophe unfold, and they watched the oil company's pathetic response. The ugly drama sparked a national environmental movement and the creation of Earth Day. Almost overnight, the Goleta Slough went from an eyesore to an asset. Bird habitats were suddenly much more important, and the debate over the future of the slough heated up. In this article, the UCSB chancellor is still defending the freeway project, but another historic in Isla Vista would soon change his tune. Despite public outcry, the Santa Barbara City Council approved the freeway extension through the slough. The last quote in this article says, "That's progress. We've got to go. We can't stop." This 1970, I want you guys all to read this while I'm speaking right now, okay? I'll wait. This 1970 editorial explains how the Isla Vista riots and the environmental movement changed the attitudes of UCSB students and faculty. Chancellor Cheadle's popularity tanked, and the state threatened to cut funding to the campus. His opinion was now easily swayed, and his vigorous endorsement of the freeway extension ended, basically killing the project. What was left of the Goleta Slough would be spared. Moving forward, the slough would be looked at in a different light. No longer an eyesore that needed to be developed, it became a natural environment that needed to be protected. In 1982, the city of Santa Barbara officially recognized the importance of the slough and prepared the Airport Goleta Slough Coastal Plan. The following year, the property was designated as an ecological preserve by the Fish and Game Commission. In 1987, 440 acres of the Goleta Slough became the Goleta Slough Ecological Reserve and is managed by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Finally, in 2007, approximately 160 acres were named the Goleta Slough State Marine Conservation Area, including the area below the mean high tide line in Goleta Slough and Atascadero Creek. This area is designated as a no-take zone where no marine life may be taken or caught. This effectively saved all the remaining slough for future generations. In his 1984 book, historian Justin Rouge let his imagination run wild with the possibility that the Spanish had chosen the Goleta Slough as the location for their Presidio and the mission. This is his rendition of Santa Barbara being built at the Goleta Slough. I'll take good old Goleta any old day. Occasionally, when we get some rain and the mouth has not yet been broken open, the slough appears to return to some of its former glory. But its glory is short-lived, since the airport staying dry is of the ultimate importance. The slough mouth is quickly broken open to release the buildup of rainwater. Every few years, we get some serious rain, and Mother Nature reminds us who's really in charge. And I want to point out that this car right here belonged to Jason Statuki's father, who is here tonight. Jason? Jason is like in charge of this place, right? That's his dad's car, which shows how recent this was. But there's another photo of another year that we had some good rain. 2024 was one of those good rain years, and it temporarily turned Hollister Avenue into a one-lane road. The Goleta Slough may not be one of the seven wonders of the world, but it certainly has blazed an impressive trail through history. And amazingly, it has withstood centuries of man's desire to change and develop the natural world. Thankfully, humans are beginning to realize the value of our natural environment. Today, what's left of the Goleta Slough is a critical coastal salt marsh habitat, a natural home to countless birds, mammals, reptiles, and insects that all play a part in our world. So take a break and head down to Goleta Beach, park where the Sextons and the Smiths used to camp. Try to imagine a busy village on Mescaltitlan Island. Take a little walk where multiple ships ran aground, trying to navigate the narrow entrance, and appreciate the natural beauty of our Goleta Slough. And I want to give a plug to this book by Justin Rouge, Goleta, Pueblo de las Islas. If you can find it, you should buy a copy of it. It's probably out of print. And one last thing, this is the side of my business that I had a mural painted by my friend Larry Mazer in 2014. And that is Mescaltitlan Island in the slough, and that is a condor, not a vulture, by the way. As some of my customers asked, why did you paint a vulture on your building? So that is a little history in Old Town Goleta. So that is my history of the Goleta Slough. Thank you. Now what? So the question was, when did the natives disappear? Well, I think that was a process that didn't happen overnight. It started when the first guys came overland, which was Portola, and whether they knew it or not, they were spreading a lot of diseases as they walked through the area. Who asked the question? I can't see. Yeah, just them coming through started the destruction of the native population because they weren't prepared for the germs that they were carrying. And then it got worse when the Spanish came and they brought all their livestock and more people. And it wasn't only the germs, but the livestock started eating all their native plants that they used to live off of and trampling all the native plants that they used to live off. And then, so to answer your question, it was over decades. It was a slow process. It didn't happen overnight, but it happened pretty quickly in historic terms. Is the airport in danger of sinking? It's not sinking, it's staying the same level, but the water goes up and down. And every time the water builds up, it looks like the airport's sinking, but the water is going up because the slough has a bunch of creeks running into it, and they still run into it. And so they continue to add more dirt to the airport to try and keep it above water, but it's not sinking. It's just getting flooded every now and then. Love to. He wanted me to comment on the line of cityhood that goes out into the ocean and comes back to the airport. It's called the shoestring annexation. And it was one of the great political moves of all time that was made illegal immediately after he did it. But it was Mayor Jack Rickard, who they named the new terminal after at the airport, which really made me angry. But he found a way to make the Goleta Airport part of the city of Santa Barbara by running a thin, half-acre wide line out into the ocean and around, and it came back and captured the airport to make it part of the city of Santa Barbara. And it got shot down immediately after he got away with it, but he knew, important people, politics. So they changed the law. They can't do that anymore, but that's why Santa Barbara Airport is in Goleta. Well, the question was about Sir Francis Drake, and was Drake's Bay really was really Goleta Slough? Maybe. There's been, I think, books written about that, and historians debating it back and forth, and could be. We don't know. The problem was the Spaniards, they all made up different names for different places, but they used about the same 10 names for all these different places. So there's like 10 San Miguels and 10 Santa Cruzes, and they just kept reusing these same names. And so when historians go back and look, so which San Miguel are they talking about? So it's a subject of debate that you just decide which you like the best and go with it. Yeah, well, he's talking about where the cannons were cast and stuff. I don't know all the details on that, and like I said, there's a ton of debate about that, so I can't I can't give you a definite answer on that one. I haven't really heard of a lot of tsunami action other than the one flood at Refugio, which Walker Tompkins wrote about. Oh, sorry, he asked about tsunamis in the area. I remember my job. I just heard about the flooding at Refugio that pushed ships way up the canyon. That's the only instance I've heard of tsunamis here, but we're pretty well protected with those Channel Islands. Usually they block stuff like that out from us, thankfully. How did the Chumash end up in Solvang? There were Chumash in Solvang from day one. There were villages all up and down the coast. So there's a coastal band, and then there's a San Ynez band. And I'm not an expert on Chumash, and I don't want to get called out on it, but there were lots of different Chumash places that they lived all up and down the coast, inland and on the coast. So they've been there since day one. What is the difference between an estuary and a slough? You got a minute while I Google that? I don't think there's a lot of difference between an estuary and a slough. They're both similar. Maybe an estuary is more, I'm guessing, but it's probably more freshwater. A slough has salt water involved, but I'm sorry, I'm not that distinguished that I could answer that one for you. Has the salinity of the slough changed? I don't think so. It's still a combination of ocean and creeks, and during the winter when we get all those creeks running, there's less salinity, and in the summer there's less, so I don't think that's changed. Probably not, no. It's still a vibrant waterway that has a lot of life in it. The question is, where can I see what's left of Mescaltitlan Island? So if you're going to go down, let's see, how do we get there? Go down Fairview Avenue, past the airport, and keep going past the airport. And before you get to the end of the road there's a little turnoff to the right where you can park and watch airplanes land. If you pull in there's a little parking area, and they have a great little kiosk with the history. I stole a couple pictures from that. I took them off that. And Mescaltitlan is right behind you. There's a big gas plant because there's a lot of natural gas under it. So you can see what's left of Mescaltitlan right there. Or if you drive Ward Memorial, take Ward Memorial, when you're almost to the beach, just look to your right. It's a small hill now. That's all that's left of it. So that's another subject of debate is Cabrillo got hurt. He broke his leg or his arm really bad. The story's different. He broke a bone really bad, and he ended up dying. Now, where he died was on San Miguel Island, but they called 3 islands San Miguel Island, and then they buried him on an island. So that's a huge topic of debate where he really is, but we don't know for sure. But it was in this area. The question was, what was the elevation of the original Mescaltitlan Island? I couldn't tell you for sure, but my assumption would be it would be pretty close to the mesa that was just to the east of it there, and to the west of the mesa. They're probably all about the same elevation. So I don't know how many feet that is, but it was a sizable island, and there was actually there were springs on it, and it was a very cool thing. It's too bad we don't have it anymore. Okay, the question was, when I see a picture of where the slough mouth is that Sands Beach? No, that's Goleta Beach. Sands Beach, there's another slough. Well, it used to be part of the same slough, but the Devereux Lagoon, in the wintertime, Devereux Lagoon breaks open at Sands. And that's a different lagoon. They at one time were all connected. But that's a smaller lagoon. That was not as big as the Goleta Slough that opens up at Goleta Beach. The question was the status of saving the 2 hangars at the airport. So the 2 original hangars that I mentioned in this story, and I had a couple arrows pointing at them, City of Santa Barbara has ignored them for decades, and they're slowly rotting, but they're still standing. And the City of Santa Barbara has refused to do anything with them because they don't have the funding, which is always their answer, and also it's in a flood zone. Well, looking at these pictures of the airport, I think we can see that the whole airport is a flood zone. So that doesn't really stand. It doesn't hold water, as it is. But anyways, recently, after years of us giving them pressure and highlighting the fact of their ignoring them, they now are saying, the city council recently said that they would allow them to be restored. And there's a group of guys that say they can raise the funds. So the city of Santa Barbara said they can be restored, but they're not going to pay for it. So now we're going to start on a private thing of a fundraising effort to restore them and make it into like a public event center and a aviation museum. And the main group that's in charge of doing it right now is actually a hot rod group, because there used to be motor car racing at the airport, and they have a lot of connections to raise funds. So I'm saying whoever saves them, I don't care what it's about, so I'm going to back them. So there is a glimmer of hope now for them being saved, and the city of Santa Barbara has given the okay for someone else to fix them up. Very generously, I should say. She's asking about the marine mammals and the wildlife in the slough, basically. There's not a rookery in the slough. I don't think there ever was, but there are several on the coast, and they're being watched, especially on the Gaviota coast. There's several. And the snowy plovers have a lot of protection nowadays. Some would argue too much protection, but they are being protected. So but there's no rookery, and there's not a lot of mammals in the slough anymore. I don't think. It's mostly birds and maybe some fish and a lot of insects. Yes, that is Santa Cruz Market. That was an airplane hangar built in the 1930s. They got moved. It was on the municipal golf, where today is the municipal golf course. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, I didn't repeat the question, but that's all right.
Does Santa Cruz still have chicken leg quarters for 98 cents?
The question was, does Santa Cruz Market still have chicken leg quarters for 98 cents? And the answer is yes. Every few weeks they do, matter of fact. And it is the friendly store that saves you more. Yeah, they recently put up a World War II memorial at the Santa Barbara Airport. That's correct. And the two hangars actually contributed to the war effort too, so another reason to save them. Yes. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask about the airport terminal. My understanding is that it had to be moved.
Yeah.
To make room for the current terminal.
Correct. Yeah.
And that had to do with the flood zone. Could you comment on that?
Yeah. So the question was about the old airport terminal being moved to make room for the new one. Yeah, well, you got to give the city credit for saving that historic building, because it is a beautiful building. And it was a great terminal, and it still is beautiful. And they did, actually, there's a little history exhibit in there that has a lot of cool pictures. But I don't think they moved it due to the flooding. I think they moved it to make room for that big, giant new one they built. But luckily, they saved it. I don't know if they raised the ground or anything for the new terminal, but I would hope they did. But I don't know that for sure. So.
About how far was it moved?
Not that far. 500 feet maybe or something. Wasn't very far. But kudos to them for doing it.
Yeah, I noticed on your map, the pier was further to the east on the older maps. Is that, it was called Moore's Landing, is that more towards Anderson Lane, or is that too far east?
So the question was about Moore's Landing on the Moore Mesa. That was a different pier. That was not the Goleta Pier. That was Moore's Landing, which was off Anderson Lane, off of Moore Mesa. And that was the first Goleta Pier. There's actually another story about that on my website. That was the original Goleta Pier, and it was much further to the east, way past the slough mouth. That's where the Giordano family first lived, in a shack right there, the famous Giordanos. But yeah, that pier got washed away by storms eventually, and then in the 20s they built the other Goleta Pier. Yeah, let me see here. He asked if I could show him where San Jose Creek was in my rafting quest. Well, it goes up along, pretty much goes along Patterson Avenue. And then at the end of North Patterson, when it kind of winds around, San Jose Creek keeps going up. And when you go up Old San Marcos Road, looking down, that's San Jose Creek. The Trout Club, that's San Jose Creek. And San Jose Creek goes all the way almost to Lizard's Mouth, if you guys know where that is. So San Jose is a major waterway in Goleta, yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank